Hello everybody and welcome to the Import-Export Hub channel. My name is Bogdan and on this channel I cover import-export related topics, and in this episode I will cover some of the imports and exports of India for 2020. But before I start my not so boring, I hope, Excel presentation, don't forget to take care of your index fingertips by smoothing them while hitting the like and the subscribe buttons. Okay, so India, one of the BRICS states, is a really interesting economy if you ask me, and my guess is that India will be the next big growth pole in terms of labor intensive manufacturing, as China is somehow starting to lose some of its competitive advantages for these sectors, even if China is locking on much of the commodities worldwide right now in order to protect its labor intensive industries. Nonetheless, I really do think that India will be somehow a transition hub manufacturing center until Africa and especially East African countries will take on this job in the next, I don't know, 10 or 15 years. This is a personal and biased opinion, and you're more than welcome not to agree with me. But anyway, leaving behind this short introduction, let's start with the exports of India, and we see that in 2020 the total exports were at more than $275 billion, although it shrunk with almost 15% if we compare with the exports of 2019. In fact, if we look closely in this 5-year time frame, only in 2016 the exports were lower than what happened in 2020. As expected, 2020 was a hard year, not only for India but for every country. And if we look at the top 10 exporting sectors, only the pharma sector, the iron and steel, thanks to China's appetite for steel, and the cereals sectors, mostly maize exported to Middle Eastern countries, registered some increases, while for the others there were major decreases like the petroleum sector, the precious metals and precious stone sector, or the auto sector, just to cover a few of them. In terms of cumulative value, these top 10 industries or sectors, if you want, have roughly 57% in India's exports. So this is a clear indication that India's economy is very, very diversified. In terms of top export destination, we have here a table with the top 10 partners, with the United States being the main trading partner, followed by China, and on the third place we have the United Arab Emirates. Looking at these top 10 trading partners, we see that these are relatively spread all over the globe, although I suspect that the regional trade will increase, and I'm thinking at increased volumes in the short and medium terms with Bangladesh and of course China, and the more or less regional trade volume increase with Singapore, Malaysia and the United Arab Emirates. Anyway, again, that's my opinion, and I might overestimate the growth potential for that part of the world. So I think we are good, and let's move on to the imports of India. And we see that for 2020, the import volume was around $368 billion, with a decrease of about 23% compared to 2019. The main export drivers were the were the mineral fuel sector, followed by Chapter 85, and on the third place we have Chapter 71, just to cover the top three ones. And as in the case with the export trend, the total imports volume fell to that of 2016, so quite a big contraction, which is perfectly understandable given the situation with the pandemic. Now, in terms of year-on-year changes, we see that there is a lot of red, so big decreases. Only Chapter 15, so animal or vegetable fats, having almost 8% increase. And here I suspect that the main drivers are the palm and soybean oils, which are essential ingredients in the Indian cuisine. Moving on, we see the trade balance for these top 10 sectors, and as we can see, there is a lot of red. So clearly, India is a net importer and has a negative trade balance, while for the iron and the steel sector, there are more than $3 billion of positive trade balance. As in the case with the exports, I've added here the top 10 trading partners for the importing flow, and we see that China is the main trading partner, followed by the United States and the United Arab Emirates on the third place, again just to cover the top three ones. In terms of cumulative value of the imports, if we don't consider Chapter 27, so mineral fuels, then we have more or less 50% cumulative share, which is again a good in terms of sectorial import concentration. Another good thing, if you ask me, is that in these top 10 industries, if you want, there are lots of common chapters for the import and export flows. So again, this is an indication that India has some competitive advantages and industry specializations, especially for Chapter 71, so precious metals, and Chapter 72, the iron and steel sector. Anyways, let's move on and see who are the main trading partners and main drivers for the top 5 chapters. And I will start with Chapter 27. And we see that the main trading partners are Singapore, the United Arab Emirates, and the Netherlands, just to cover the top three ones. While in terms of year-on-year changes, the colors really talk for themselves. We see lots of red, except the exports towards Australia, who had almost 140% increase, bouncing back to the values of 2018. In terms of the main export drivers from this chapter, and of course limiting myself only to the top 10 trading partners, we have petroleum oils towards Singapore and electric energy for Bangladesh, which is approximately $500 million worth of exports. Moving on to the second best export driver. So the precious metals, jewelry and diamonds chapters, we see that the market shrunk quite a lot, more or less a 33% decrease compared to 2019. And again, it's understandable given the current context. The biggest export destinations were the United States, followed by Hong Kong, and on the third place we have the United Arab Emirates. The biggest relative decreases were in relation to the United Arab Emirates, Singapore and Belgium, while the exports towards the United Kingdom rose with an insignificant 0.11%, which is, I think, less than $1 million in absolute value. Anyway, it's perfectly understandable the decrease in exported values, but before I move on to the next chapter, I want you to give you some examples of export drivers from this chapter. So we are talking about jewelry for countries like the United Arab Emirates, the United Kingdom or Singapore, while the main exports towards the United States are driven by diamonds, which can be worked or not, but not mounted. Anyways, moving on to the third chapter. So the pharmaceutical sector, and we see that the situation is turned 180 degrees. So we have lots of green and quite big relative increases compared to 2019. The biggest export destinations were the United States, followed by South Africa, and on the third place we have the United Kingdom. The biggest increases in relative values compared to 2019 were in relation with South Africa, Canada and the United Kingdom, who had roughly a 23% increase. In this top 10 list, only the Russian Federation had a decrease, almost 12% compared to 2019. And here, the main driver from this chapter is HS code 3004, so medicines for therapeutic or prophylactic use, and I think it's mostly OTCs. Also, before I move on to the fourth top performing export chapter, I want to point out an important role that the United States are having in the exports of pharmaceutical products of India from an export concentration market index, as I think more than 1/3 of India's total exports are concentrated in relation with the United States. And I'm not saying that the situation will change in the foreseeable future, especially given the huge investments in India from the US big pharma manufacturers. But what's important to remember is that if by some, I don't know, geopolitical game or something similar, as in the case with the Australian wines and the Chinese anti-dumping taxes, $7 billion market will be compromised and will have ripple effects. So the idea or the key point is to be aware that the big export market concentration index can result in a strong geopolitical leverage for the importing country. This is not breaking news. Countries do it from time to time, and it's part of their strategies. Anyways, let's move on to the fourth chapter. So really quick, lots of relative decreases in year-on-year changes, except with the United Arab Emirates. The biggest export destinations are the United States, Germany, and the United Arab Emirates. Now, in terms of main export drivers from these chapters, we see turbojets and other gas turbines, as in the case with the United States and France, taps, valves, and so on, as in the case with the United Arab Emirates, or compression ignition internal combustion engines, as in the case with China. So, as I promised, really quick passing through this chapter, and I will cover now the last chapter from the export flow, which is chapter 29, so organic chemicals. And I really have goosebumps when hearing about organic chemicals, as it was my nemesis during high school, and I think that this will be also a quick passing through chapter. Anyway, the main export drivers, the main export destination countries are China, followed by the United States and Germany on the third place. In terms of year-on-year relative change, the biggest decrease was in relation to China, while in terms of growth, again, year-on-year, the biggest one was in relation with Switzerland. And sorry guys, I don't want to make a bigger fool of myself, but I think I will skip reading the main export drivers from this chapter. So let's skip this one and start with the first main chapter for the import flow, which is chapter 27. And we see here that the demand for petroleum decreased with the relative values falling much, as in the case with the imports from Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, or Australia. And as expected, all the major trading partners are important hydrocarbons exporters from Middle East or Australia. In terms of the biggest drivers, these are of course crude petroleum gases, as in the case with the imports from Qatar, for example, or coal, as in the case with the imports for Australia, and I think also from South of Africa. So quite big changes in the demand, and it's again perfectly understandable given the current context and the high level of uncertainty from 2020. So these are the main import drivers for India, and we're ready to move on to the second chapter. So chapter 84, electrical machinery and equipment, and we see that the main partners from which India is sourcing and importing are China, Hong Kong on the second place, and Vietnam on the third one, just to cover the top three ones. In terms of year-on-year changes, again, we see quite large changes, and some of the biggest relative decreases were in relation to Japan, the United States, and Germany, while the imports from Taiwan increased almost 52% compared to 2019, as the demand for integrated circuits was the main driver behind this increase. Other import drivers from this chapter are the mobile phones, which drive most of the imports from China, and electrical apparatus for switching or protecting electrical circuits, as in the case with the imports from Japan. Moving on to the third chapter, so chapter 71, we see that as in the case with the exports from this chapter, the year-on-year changes are quite high, as there is a strong correlation between the imports and the exports from this chapter. So if the demand for jewelry drops, and we saw earlier that India is a major exporter, you will expect, of course, that the imports will follow a similar trend and see the imports of semi-manufactured gold or diamonds to drop as well. In terms of major import partners, Switzerland is the biggest one, followed by the United Arab Emirates and the United States on the third place. The biggest relative drop in imports were in relation to the United Kingdom, Ghana, and Belgium, while the only country in this top 10 list who experienced some increases in volumes is in relation with Bolivia. The main import drivers are gold, which is imported from Switzerland, Bolivia, or Ghana, while diamonds are imported from historically well-renowned diamond trading hubs like Hong Kong or Antwerp in Belgium. So that's it for this chapter, and I will move on to the next one, which is organic chemicals, so chapter 29, and here we see that the main importing trading partners are China, the United States, and Singapore. In terms of the biggest year-on-year changes, we have the drop in import values from South Korea, Singapore, and Taiwan, while there was some increase in import volumes from Belgium. The biggest import drivers were antibiotics from China, acyclic alcohols from Saudi Arabia, and heterocyclic compounds from Belgium. And finally, moving on to the last chapter, which is machinery and mechanical appliances, we see that China is the biggest partner, followed by Germany, and on the third place we have the United States. In terms of year-on-year relative changes, the biggest decreases were in relation with Japan, the United States, and the United Kingdom, while there is also some increased import activity in relation with Hong Kong. The main import drivers from this category we have turbojets coming from Germany and the United Kingdom, personal computers and components from Hong Kong, or taps and valves from Italy. And with this, I've covered the top 5 categories for both the import and export flows, and I think I can prepare to finish this video and provide you with some conclusions. The first one will be that India's economy is highly diversified. We see that there are lots of intra-chapter trading activity for both the import and export flows, suggesting that there are some specialization taking place in India. And let's not forget that this is also a suggestion that India has some strong competitive advantage. The second conclusion would be that India is not only an exporter of services, particularly in offshoring and outsourcing activities for the ICT sector, but it's also a major importer and exporter of raw materials and finished goods. The third conclusion would be the importance of the pharma sector in India's economy, and we saw together that there is a quite high export market concentration towards the United States. And the fourth and the last one will be the importance of the precious metals and jewelry sector in India's economy, as India is a major processor, if you want, of gold and diamonds, given the relatively high labor intensive activity of this sector. And with all this being said, my time is up. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to comment and hit the like and the subscribe buttons. And until next time, keep your business safe. Thanks.